It's always a journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's always taking us somewhere for his name's sake and for the sake of the kingdom. You know, that first year that I was a Christian, that was so formative in my life, and then got wonkied because what ministry happened. I saw lives changed in a rescue mission. Transformed.
Yeah.
Of years and years and years of just shattered lives, broken families, addiction, people coming out of prison, seeing lives transformed.
Welcome, everyone, to podcast number 241, Renew Your Mind. With us today, we have Senior Pastor Paul Gruenberg. We have Pastor Jeremy Touroo. We have our family and youth director, Jordan Kettlewell. And we have a very special guest, Shane Chellis. And we'll let him introduce himself in just a minute here. So, a couple weeks ago, we had an event at the Gaylord Methodist Church, and it was called Making Disciples. And it was our pleasure to listen to Shane. He was the speaker, along with Kevin Harbin from the Houghton Lake Methodist Church. And it was a great event. And we're so excited to have Shane come back and talk about more things. We're not going to talk about the event, but I did have a question. Why was that event so important to you? Was it, how did you think of it? Was it in collaboration with others? But it just seemed to be your niche, and we were all pretty enthralled. So I'll ask
inquiring
Shane.
minds want to know.
And if you want to give us your background, first, that would be better.
Okay. Well, the Reader's Digest version of things is I'm a native of the area. I'm from Ellsworth, born and raised in there, and met Jesus in a really, really radical way when I was 21. Out of a life of hedonism and addiction, and then went on. There was in Bible college for a year and a half later, and went on there to Wesley Biblical Seminary. I followed my grandfather into the United Methodist Church. I had my grandfather and 4 great uncles were all clergy out of the West Michigan and Detroit annual conferences of the Asburyan stock of
Amen.
United
Asbury,
Methodist.
right.
I feel like I always got to qualify that, but is what it was. And so, and then what was in my bones throughout that, as I was learning and growing, and I had, if I were to back up, that year and a half, I struggled for about 6 months. I was getting clean, just coming out of that whole way of life. But that next year, before I went off to Bible college in Iowa, we went to church on Sunday between the Wesleyan Church in Ellsworth and then the Methodist Church down in Delton, where my grandfather was. He's retired by then, and I had moved down there for about 6 months before I went to college. But so we were going to church on Sunday morning, but that's not where life happened. I was gathered with about 5 other young 20-somethings at that point in time. I think it was 21 or 22. And we would gather 4, 5, 6 nights a week for anywhere from 2 to 3, 4, 5 hours every night, and read the scriptures, pray, sing, just be with one another. Had no idea that was so much in the fabric of what early Methodism was. But that's where life started to change. That was kind of the catalyst of me. I don't want to say the catalyst of getting clean, but it certainly was a huge help along that road of being in community, being with one another. Again, prayer, singing, worshiping. And because I wasn't a part of the church really growing up. I went a little bit here and there with my mother when she made me, but it was never a part of life. And so that became so much of the foundational framework as somebody who didn't know anything about anything. I'd never read the Bible. I never read a book before that. I tell people the only thing I had ever read cover to cover was a motorcycle magazine. And so being a part of a community that we're all seeking the same thing, it was huge for me. And then I would go on into Bible college and then on to seminary. But combined with that, in those early days, what I fell in love with was the whole foundation of the Methodist tradition within our own culture. The way that the Methodist movement had such an impact on the formation of our country. That's why you have a Methodist church in every little burg across the nation, because of the circuit riders and the things that went out. And so many of those started, if they're more than 100 years old, were started with a class meeting.
Yes.
They were started with those small groups as the foundation of them. And so that frontier spirit was always so much, it was a part of me.
Right.
That was raw and didn't kind of fit the mold and wasn't really churchy. And, I've got tattoos and I got earrings and I've got all this stuff. And it's the world I came out of. And, I remember when I met Jesus, I was back in the bar down in Ellsworth buying rounds for people, telling them what Jesus had done for me. That's what
you start where you're at.
That's right. How do you celebrate?
That's right.
And the shift came. So I think this is where this is going to go here. Let me tell this story, and we'll bring it full circle back around. Went to Bible college, got married, went on to Wesley Biblical Seminary, was there for 3 years. Had to transfer. I transferred up to Garrett because I was in the UMC at that time, and Wesley Biblical was too evangelical. Didn't have Senate approval by the UMC, and so I transferred up to Garrett. I'm pastoring 2 churches in Wisconsin, driving down a couple times a week to Chicago to go to seminary. I was taking an Augustine class one evening. And met on Thursday night. I come down there. I spent the night there, and then went to class on Friday morning and head back. My wife and my had 2 babies at the time up there in Milwaukee area, and this is important for me to say this. So forgive me if I'm spending more time on this, but I went to a very staunch conservative Bible college that was shaped by the holiness movement.
Yeah.
And I love everything about the Wesleyan tradition. Unfortunately, there was some baggage. There's some baggage that comes along with the holiness movement, where there were some legalisms that came with that. Unfortunately, and so much good stuff was built into my life, but there was some baggage that came with that too. And so I show up at Bible college with stovepipe, skater pants, and a Fox Racing skull and crossbones T-shirt, and that's what I was. And by that next year, I'm wearing slacks and shirt and tie, and because this is what you do.
Expectations.
This is what you do, and it says I'm going to be a pastor, and so this is what you do. Not realizing that I was being shaped by culture. It was a cultural identification, not a biblical one, and so that became an identity for me throughout Bible college and then into seminary. And so I'm down in Chicago, and the class went long, and I had a hankering. I got down. I hadn't eaten dinner yet. It was probably about pushing 9:30, 10 o'clock. And I had a hankering for chicken wings. Who hasn't had a hankering for chicken wings?
Amen.
Give that one an amen.
It's a Thursday night, I remember, because a lot of the restaurants were closing at 10, but the bars were open. And I started having this moral dilemma. You're on the campus of Northwestern there, and so you have some college bars. And I started having this moral dilemma. I shouldn't go into a bar. I mean, I'm a preacher, and so if somebody sees me, what are people going to think? Finally, my longing for chicken wings won out over my moral dilemma.
As it tends to do, yeah.
And so then what happened? So I went there. It was an L-shaped bar. I remember there was probably about 15 college students on one end, and nobody on this long line. And so I go to the very end, and I sit down.
In your shirt and tie.
In my shirt and tie. Yeah,
right.
Yep. And I might have been wearing a collar at that time, because I was wearing a clerical collar too. I don't know if I wore that in there that night, because I didn't want people to know who I was. But
sure.
And I ordered my food, and I see out of the corner of my eye somebody walking down. And I remember looking over here. There's a fire exit. There's no bathroom. I'm thinking, surely this guy isn't coming to sit by me. Sure enough, he comes, plops down right next to me, orders a beer, and the first thing out of his mouth was, "So what do you do?"
Dangerous question.
You ever have that 5-minute conversation in your head in a matter of like 3 seconds?
Yeah.
And because, well, all right, here we go. I said, "I'm a pastor." And he goes, "A pastor?" And literally about falls off his bar stool. But that would end up, in the next hour, one of the most amazing conversations I had in a very, very long time. And we talked about, just opened up his life to me, about just broken life, broken family. And we talked about redemption, and we talked about forgiveness, and we talked about Jesus. And as I got ready to leave, he paid for my chicken wings, by the way. And he turned around, got ready to leave, and he grabbed me by the arm, and he had tears coming down his eyes. He goes, "Man, thanks for listening." And I walked out the door. I was parked about a block away, and I sobbed the whole way back to my car, repeating out loud, "What's happened to me? What's happened to me?" And I recognized for the first time since I'd become a Christian that I hated myself. Right there.
For the outward changes.
I had become something that was not who I was at all. But this is what I had to do, and this is what I had to be, because Jesus was real, and I'd met him in a profound way, and this is what you do now. And the Lord spoke to me on that sidewalk in Chicago on a Thursday night at about 11:30 in the evening. And he said to me, "It's about time. Because I never asked you to be this. I called you to be a pastor. I never asked you to be this." That began a whole new direction for me that would take probably about 4 or 5 years to really come to fruition. But that was that was the continued laying of that foundation about what really is this, and the need of community, the need of honesty, the need of being willing to have the people around me that I can call a thing what it is, and just be willing to tell the truth about my own heart, my own life. And that's what would become life and ministry for me in the days ahead. And that's what had me at a rescue mission for the next 8 years when I finally stepped out of parish ministry and fell in love with that. I remember being about 3 years into that kind of ministry, where your congregation was prostitutes and drug addicts
But they were people who were real.
Yes.
They weren't putting on airs.
Exactly.
And they needed help.
Exactly. That's the issue right there. There's no pretense with that.
Well, I remember you telling us or sharing with us when you came up about a month or so ago about your mom and her getting to the place where God said, now we can begin. Because she was broken. The pretense was gone.
Yes.
and she was willing to do whatever she needed to do
Yes.
to get right
Yes.
with God, and then to begin a journey with God through Kazakhstan and the other missionary places. I can't
India.
remember. India.
Yep. Kazakhstan, India.
So there's a theme here for you, but it's not just for you. It's for everyone, right?
Yeah. If I were to fast forward from where that goes, I mean, there's a building. God's always there's always a journey, right? He's always taking us somewhere for His name's sake and for the sake of the kingdom. And where this would eventually go, some 15 years later, after that shift of life came, is this is what we need is not simply, when I talk about that kind of community, that for me started way back when, that first year that I was a Christian, that was so formative in my life, and then got wonkied.
Got cultured.
Christianized.
Christianized.
We can say that, and I don't, well, we'll leave that there.
How about we say pharisaical?
Well, that's probably more religionized.
Yeah, religionized.
And as we have gone on, I've said before that the burden of my own heart for many, many years has been going, how do you take what we've been doing? Because what ministry happened, I saw lives changed in a rescue mission. Transformed. Yeah. Of years and years and years of just shattered lives, broken families, addiction, people coming out of prison. I've seen lives transformed. Some miracles happen, demons cast out of people. So saw this as the way of life. Okay, this is happening in places like this. How do we wed that with the life of the church? Because that's supposed to be what the life of the church is. That kind of that hospital for the broken, shattered reality of our world. That here is the community of heaven in the midst of a world of darkness.
Right.
The body of Christ, where His people love one another and forgive one another and walk with one another and look unto the one who is the author and the finisher of our faith. And the King is in our midst, who has all authority and all power. It was Ascension Sunday yesterday.
Yes.
But it's not.
It's not. And here's a story of a young lady who gets pregnant out of marriage, and God speaks to her, and she knows she needs to be back in church. She walks in the church, and an older lady whom she respected approaches her and says, "You shouldn't be here." Single mom, or not even a mother, but pregnant, knowing that she needed to be with God, that this is a church that she had grown up with. And the stink of her life was enough that a woman of, we'll call religionized, would say, you shouldn't be here.
Right.
It just breaks my heart.
Right.
We have become, as a church, so, what's the word when you paint a fence? Whitewashed.
Yeah.
In regard to how we should look when we go to church.
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
And yet, and we all put on our happy face, our happy masks, and how's it going? Oh, it's going great, blah, blah, blah. And it just, that's the analogy I use a lot.
Right.
Is it
Right.
the church should be a hospital.
Yes. Yeah.
With people of various degrees of sickness or sin that need to move through a process where they can become healed.
Yep.
And you see that in the rescue mission because those people, they know they're broken. Everyone knows they're broken. I know when people come into church that they're broken somewhere.
Right.
But will they be willing to admit that?
There's kind of the issue, right?
Yeah.
And there's the difference between putting on
airs.
I don't want to. It can be cliche-ish for us to talk this way, but it's the truth when we put on the masks, and I think I said this there, that sometimes I feel like I'm walking to a Lego movie.
Yeah.
You know?
Everything is
awesome.
Yeah.
and we do this, but it's not. And we go back from there, back into a place of, at times, flat out despair. then one of my burdens then comes is that we shape the church in order to accommodate that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so it becomes about how exciting can we get things, and how ramped up to give me an emotional high, but it doesn't touch the deep. It doesn't. That's
Right.
That's you know.
And here's the other thing: like, even if maybe that is the truth, maybe that is their life, maybe everything is awesome. I mean, maybe they've been walking with Christ for years, and he's cleaned somebody up, and they're living in the fog. I had a pastor one time that used to refer to the fog all the time. The first time I met him, I said, "How you doing, Pastor?" He said, "I'm living in the fog," and I just smiled, like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then he preached on it sometime later on down the line, was talking about the fog, the favor of God, right? So maybe life is awesome, but there was a time before Jesus when life was not awesome. Yeah. And so it's equally important that even if you are walking like life is grand, you still don't ever want to lose touch or lose scope of that time when it wasn't.
Where you've come from. Right,
where you've come from and what Christ did for you to make life grand.
Yeah.
So it's either a mask or it's genuine, but you still need to have a scope of reference for where you came from in order to be able to bridge that divide between the church and the ministry of Christ,
right.
which shouldn't be two separate things, right? But the two images that you present, how to blend those together. Like we have to remember where we came from and what Christ did in our life.
Right.
I wanted to ask you, how did you, that first tight-knit group where you met 4 and 5 nights a week, how did you fall into that?
They were knew him one was my cousin.
Okay.
It was his best friend, and then 2 people from their group. It was part of their group that they're all part of youth group together.
Okay.
But they'd all graduated. They were heading to college. I was just going to college, and we didn't have anything better to do.
More constructive, you mean?
Yeah, I guess. Well, yeah. I mean, for me, it was part of a relearning time because not too long before, I would have been getting smoked every night, and that was life. You party all night, work all day. You work hard and you party hard, and life had changed for that, and so it was a relearning of life for me. That group was already there, but somehow when we got together, that's just what we started to do
right
I
together.
see.
Yeah. And then the more that we did it together, the more we wanted to do it. That was the interesting thing about it.
Yeah.
The more we did it, the more we gathered, the more we hungered.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
it.
Shane, would you say you were discipled through that?
That was the beginning of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was it wasn't in any one person.
Right.
It was coming from one another.
Yeah.
Because we were speaking into one another. And one of them was my cousin. And so, we could bicker at one another, and I remember some of those bickerings way back in the day, and I'm looking at myself going, "You're just an idiot." I'm stupid. Arrogant little twit I was, and the same for him.
Yeah.
But it was recognizing that and learning how to. Part of growing up and maturity is learning how to fight well.
Yeah.
I mean, it needs to happen in marriage.
Yeah.
How do you fight fair?
Right.
And then it's through that learning what's worth fighting about at all.
Okay.
And that's part of a growing up in a maturing. Well, that happens relationally. It happens in the church. It's not that conflict isn't there. It's been said before, there's a reason that marriage is looked at as a grace, a sacrament historically, is because there's no other place in all of the world that I'm forced to confront my own self-centeredness.
Yeah.
That's right.
Because if I don't, there's problems coming.
Yeah.
If I don't,
Right.
well, if I understand that the church or marriage is a microcosm of the church,
Yes.
that's what it is.
Mm.
And the church, and then in marriage is the witness of the covenant of Christ and His
Right.
church, and so relationally, how we submit to one another in marriage, that's how the scriptures talk about how the church operates
Right.
together. And that's how we're in union with the head of the church. we yield to him and he gives himself to us. It's that layered, that wheel within a wheel kind of thing that goes up there. Well, I got to grow into that, and I learned that. I'm being sanctified through that.
Right.
So sorry, I'll get on tangents.
No, that's
no,
all right.
no.
No, this is perfect.
Shane, that's what we do here.
That's what we do.
Yes.
Yeah. I think we'll wrap it up this one, and then we'll come back and we'll think of another great question to ask you. No, but thank you everyone for listening. Thank you to Shane for being our guest. We come to you from the Gaylord Methodist Church, and we have 2 services on Sunday, one traditional at 9 a.m. and a contemporary at 10:45 a.m. We'd love to have you join us. Oh, we also have every second and fourth Wednesday, we have an Encountering God service, a little more question and answer. So we'd love to have you join us in person. If you can't, though, you can see us on Facebook or YouTube. If you have any questions, Google us, call the office, 989-732-5380. Thanks again, everyone.
Okay.